For centuries, the assumption held that ancient battlefields dissolved into pure chaos the moment the fighting began. 10,000 men swinging blind through dust and screaming, with no way to steer the fight once it started. That assumption survives only because almost nobody looks at what these armies actually carried into the field. Bronze trumpets, painted shields, water clocks rigged to burn through a message in exact intervals. Torches cut to precise lengths and lit on hilltops 100 miles apart. Every one of these objects was built for a single purpose, turning noise and fire into language, fast enough to move an army before it broke apart. But here is what almost nobody talks about. Some of the most disciplined communication systems in human history were built more than 2,000 years before the telegraph, by commanders who could not shout a message across a battlefield, but could still make 10,000 men turn, halt, or charge inside 4 seconds. That detail changes everything that comes after. In the summer of 396 before the Common Era, a trumpeter named Timaeus of Elis stood in the stadium at Olympia and won an event that had never existed at the games before. A contest for the loudest, clearest blast a single man could produce on a bronze salpinx. It sounds almost comic, a trumpet competition inside a festival of runners and wrestlers. It was not comic to any man who had stood inside a phalanx. The salpinx was not built for music. It was a straight bronze horn, harsh and piercing, designed for exactly one job: cutting through the sound of 8,000 bronze shields locking together, and the screaming of soldiers taking their first wound. A Greek phalanx moved as a single block, sometimes 16 ranks deep, and once that block started forward, there was no shouted order that could travel from one end of the line to the other. Only one sound could reach that far. The blast for the charge rose sharply and cut off. The blast for the halt held flat and low. Soldiers drilled for months to react to 2 notes without a moment of thought, because thinking inside that wall of shields was already too slow to keep a man alive. But that was only half of the problem. A trumpet could tell an army when to move. It could not tell a sentry, alone on watch at 2 in the morning, whether the man walking toward him in the dark was a comrade or a knife. Roughly 2 centuries after Timaeus won his trumpet contest, a Greek historian named Polybius sat inside a Roman military camp, not as a prisoner, but as a hostage turned staff officer, attached to the general Scipio Aemilianus during the campaign that ended with the destruction of Carthage in the year 146 before the Common Era. Polybius wrote down something the Roman army had been doing quietly for a generation, a system nobody outside the legion had bothered to record. Each night, the password for the camp was carved onto a small wooden tablet called a tessera. That tablet began at the 10th maniple and passed hand to hand through every unit in the legion in complete silence, moving through the dark camp until it returned to where it started. If the tablet failed to come back, someone along the line was missing, dead, or working for the enemy. The system caught infiltrators before they ever reached the command tent, and it did it without a single voice crossing open ground, where a shout might carry straight to an enemy scout lying in the grass outside the wall. The tessera solved the camp at night. It did nothing for the legion in daylight, moving through smoke and thrown dust so thick that a man could lose sight of his own commander 10 paces away. For that, the Romans relied on the signa, the bronze standards carried at the head of every century and cohort, each one shaped differently and mounted high enough to catch light above the haze of battle. Julius Caesar, writing his own account of the invasion of Britain in 55 before the Common Era, described the moment his legions hesitated at the shoreline, afraid to leap from the ships into deep water, under a rain of enemy spears. The standard-bearer of the 10th Legion, a man Caesar never names but credits by his position alone, jumped first, alone, holding the eagle above the waves and shouting that he would not let the standard fall into enemy hands even if the rest of the legion abandoned him. The soldiers who followed him into the surf were not following, an order shouted over the wind. They were following a shape they could see, gold and unmistakable, refusing to go under. But standards and trumpets both depended on one thing. Neither could survive: distance. Sooner or later, an army needed to speak to another army or another city, far past the range of any horn or any flag a man could lift. 100 years before Polybius wrote about the Tessera, a Greek military writer and city defender named Aeneas Tacticus, from the town of Stymphalos, faced exactly that problem. He needed to send full sentences between allied cities under siege by a shared enemy, across distances too far for a shout and too dark for anyone to read a flag. His solution used 2 identical water clocks, each fitted with a wooden rod marked at intervals with a list of pre-written messages. Reinforcements arriving, enemy retreating, gate breached, hold the position. An observer on one hilltop lit a torch and opened the tap on his clock at the exact same instant. The observer on the far hill, watching for that flame across the dark valley, opened his own identical clock the moment he saw it. When the first torch went out, both men stopped their clocks together and read off whichever message the water level had reached. 2 cities, separated by miles of enemy territory, could exchange one specific sentence using nothing but fire, water, and a piece of shared engineering built before either side needed to speak a single word aloud. And what they found next was stranger still, because the same problem existed at the scale of an entire empire. Not just 2 neighboring towns, the Persians had already solved a version of it decades before Aeneas Tacticus built his clocks. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century before the Common Era, described a chain of towers and hilltop posts stretched across the Persian Empire, each one within sight of the next, where a single beacon lit at one end could carry a message across mountain ranges faster than any rider could carry it on horseback. A fire raised on one summit could reach a capital city before an army even finished forming its ranks on a battlefield hundreds of miles away. The Greek playwright Aeschylus staged the opening scene of his tragedy Agamemnon around exactly this kind of watchman, a man standing alone on a rooftop for 10 years, waiting for a single fire to appear on a distant peak and announce that Troy had finally fallen. The watchman never receives a name in the play. The relay he is standing inside of, peak to peak across the sea, was not invented for the stage. It was already old. But the real question was never how far a single signal could travel. It was what happened when silence itself became the only safe language left. In the year 401 before the Common Era, a Greek soldier and writer named Xenophon found himself deep inside the Persian Empire with no functioning chain of command at all. The mercenary force marching with him, remembered today as the 10,000, had just watched its 5 senior generals murdered under a false truce by the Persian satrap Tissaphernes. Xenophon, who had held no formal rank days earlier, was suddenly responsible for organizing a fighting retreat of 10,000 men through hostile country stretching well over 1,000 miles. He revived an old Greek practice called the sisimon. A spoken watchword changed every single night and passed from unit to unit at the start of each march. A soldier who could not answer correctly in the dark was treated as an enemy, without exception and without a second attempt. Xenophon paired that whispered word with something far older, the war cry the Greeks called the Eleliou. thousands of voices locking into a single sound at the exact moment of contact. The cry was never really meant for the enemy. It was meant for every soldier standing in that formation, so that in the smoke and the screaming, a man could tell by sound alone that the line beside him was still holding, still breathing, still there. None of these systems needed a single written order to cross a battlefield. A trumpet note, a wooden tablet passed hand to hand, a torch timed against a bowl of draining water, a shouted word answered correctly in the dark. Somewhere on a hilltop, in every one of these armies, a man was always watching for exactly one signal. The moment he saw it, 10,000 men moved as one,